The murders of Spencer and Monique Tepe. Prosecutors say they know who pulled the trigger, but why? Sources now reveal Michael McKee struggled to move on after his divorce from Monique Tepe. Friends saying he thought she couldn't live without him. So when she moved on and started a new, happy chapter in her life, did Michael McKee snap? This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Gillespie. We're now getting a closer look at the relationship between Monique Tepe and her ex-husband and accused killer, Michael McKee. Longtime friends of Monique are speaking out, alleging that Michael was controlling, domineering, and isolating. But what I can't seem to get past is the timeline in all of this. When Spencer and Monique were killed, they were just days away from celebrating their 5-year wedding anniversary. Monique had clearly moved on, but had Michael? Was it Monique's past relationship that came back to haunt her? One of Monique's closest friends now revealing Michael McKee thought she could not live without him, that she needed him. So for her to thrive in her new marriage, that just destroyed his fragile little ego. If you're interested in cases like this one, we're talking top true crime news, body cams, interrogations, deep dives into some of the most scandalous of cases, then make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so that you don't miss anything. Now, onto the case of Spencer and Monique Tepe.
By the power vested in me by the Universal Life Church and by the state of Ohio, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride.
This is how family and friends remember 37-year-old Spencer and 39-year-old Monique Tepe, happy and in love. The pair were married years ago in their Columbus, Ohio home and shared 2 children together, a 4-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son. Spencer was an avid golfer, Monique an avid runner, but everyone says they always put their kids first. Spencer's cousin wrote an excerpt about them on a GoFundMe page, and it really says it all. She wrote, "Their presence was as big as their hearts. Monique's charm and infectious smile lit up every room. She was warm with a strength that inspired everyone around her. Spencer was the soul of every gathering, grand in personality, yet calm, steady, and kind. Together, they were truly remarkable inside and out. They were a solid pair with a bright future. They were the proud parents of 2 beautiful children, and every day they showed up with unwavering love and devotion to their family." One of Monique's longtime friends told the same thing to People magazine, saying, quote, "Everything you see is completely true because that's who they were. That's how much love and pride and joy they had for one another. They really were perfect. Their kids really were perfect. Their life really was perfect." Now, that friend's name wasn't identified in the article because she's brought forward some pretty severe allegations against Michael McKee himself, the same man who's now accused of killing both Spencer and Monique in their own home as their young children slept. Investigators say that happened between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. on Tuesday, December 30th, 2025. They believe Michael McKee entered the Tepe family home and killed Monique and Spencer in their 2nd-story bedroom. Monique was shot once in the chest and Spencer was shot multiple times. Their young children and the family dog were left unharmed. Investigators later used this Nest camera video from the Tepe's neighborhood to track down Michael McKee, later revealing that his vehicle was found near the scene of the crime. They say he drove from his home in Rockford, Illinois, almost 8 hours to allegedly commit the crimes. He was later arrested in Illinois, reportedly while at a Chick-fil-A. Right now, he's being held in the Winnebago County Jail, and he's expected to appear in court later this week for an extradition hearing. But after Michael's arrest, investigators revealed multiple weapons were collected from his belongings, including what's believed to be the murder weapon. And here's where the plot thickens. Michael McKee is Monique's ex-husband, but as I said at the top of the episode, she'd clearly moved on. She was married to someone else. She had 2 kids, a house, a dog, essentially a white picket fence. So is it just that Michael McKee hadn't moved on? That's what Monique's friend told People, simply saying she had moved on. He had not. Monique and Michael got married on August 22nd, 2015 in Columbus, Ohio. About the early days of this relationship, Monique's friend said, at first, when it was just starting out, they seemed so happy and they were so in love, but he was always manipulative. Monique is from Ohio, and Michael has roots there too. He actually graduated from The Ohio State University. But as is being widely reported, he's a doctor, specifically a vascular surgeon. So at the time of their wedding, Michael was still wrapping up his training. So after they tied the knot, the couple then moved to Virginia, where Michael would complete his post-medical school residency. And at this point, Michael and Monique are supposed to be happy newlyweds, just starting out their lives together. But Monique's friend alleges that he became controlling over her during this time, especially when she expressed sadness about living 5 hours from her friends and family back in Ohio. She's a family girl and a girl's girl. She needs that in her life, and she didn't have that. It was just the two of them in a new place, and she had no support system. And really just imagine that. You just got married. You're starting a brand new life, hours away from your home, your friends, your family, everything and everyone that you know. And that is scary alone for anyone. But then add to that living with someone who's allegedly controlling and manipulative. About this, Monique's friend said, he needed to be in control of most situations, but wouldn't make it seem like he was controlling the situation. And according to Monique's friend, that's really what led up to her and Michael splitting up. They separated in March of 2016, and the following year, Monique filed for divorce. The court documents list Monique as the plaintiff, meaning she is the one who filed for divorce, and Michael was the defendant, meaning he's the one that she wanted a divorce from. The reason for the divorce, per the court documents, quote, plaintiff states that the parties are incompatible. The paperwork is simple and straightforward, but there was seemingly a lot more to this breakup. We've mentioned the allegations that Michael McKee was controlling and manipulative, but Monique's brother-in-law says it went a step further than that.
And again, yeah, I'm just trying to speak for the Tepe side of the family because, Monique's side had obviously a different relationship with her. They've known her since she was born. For us, we met Monique in 2018 when Spencer first introduced her to us. But we were fairly certain because of just what Monique had told us stories wise of her. She never called him by name. She would just call him her ex-husband, and just how much of a monster he was, to be honest, emotionally abusive and threatening. And, she did everything she could to extricate herself from that situation. And, met Spencer and lived a very happy life. But I can't speak for Monique, but I know that it changed her as a person. And perhaps it was always in the back of her mind. I don't know. I would say that she was always worried about him. But at the same time, we never thought that it seemed like a direct threat. Um, and she never mentioned, like, of recent, at least to me, that that he'd been in contact with her or anything. So, um, that's all I can say, I guess.
The Columbus Division of Police says it went further than this alleged emotional abuse, too. They allege Monique's death was the result of a domestic violence situation.
This is still an active and ongoing investigation. Detectives are still going through evidence, tips, and videos. We can't speak to all the specific details related to this case, so we don't want to jeopardize the ultimate goal of conviction. But what we can say, this was a targeted attack. This was a domestic violence-related attack. As we know, McKee is the ex-husband of Monique Tepe. We can say that we have the suspect's vehicle on neighborhood video surveillance arriving just before the murders and leaving shortly after. Detectives were able to link this vehicle to McKee. The vehicle was located in Rockford, Illinois, and evidence was found that showed McKee in possession of the vehicle before and after the homicides. We can also say that multiple weapons were taken from the property of McKee, and there is a preliminary link from our NIBIN to one of the weapons that ties it to the homicides.
Monique's friend reacted to these allegations and the allegations that Michael McKee was allegedly stalking Monique leading up to her death. She said, I'll say that we've been talking about it, but none of us ever actually saw any evidence of this. What friends did see, though, was Monique moving on after her divorce. At first, Monique's friend says she struggled for a bit, but then she got back to her normal self. Eventually, Monique got back out there and started using the apps. She even referenced all of this in her vows to Spencer.
Spencer, what can I say? From day one, I knew you were something special. I had quite a journey to get to you. Countless bad bumble dates, wrong relationships, and waterfalls of tears. But it was worth every cringing second because it led me to you.
We know what happened when Monique got back out there. She met Spencer, they got married, they had 2 kids. Meanwhile, Michael, allegedly, struggled to move on from Monique. Her friend told People magazine that whenever Michael would run into mutual friends, he would ask about Monique. How's she doing? What's she up to? What's going on? The friend went on to say he thought she could not live without him, that she needed him. So for her to thrive in her new marriage, that just destroyed his fragile little ego. So is it possible that's a motive in Spencer and Monique's murders? We can't confirm that based on what police are saying, but it's a possibility. And speaking of these allegations, as we reported last week, Michael McKee's charges have been bumped up. On Friday, he was indicted by a grand jury in Ohio on 6 total charges. Here's how they break down. First, count 1, aggravated murder. The court docs read, the jurors of the grand jury of the state of Ohio, duly selected, impaneled, sworn, and charged to inquire of crimes and offenses committed within the body of Franklin County in the state of Ohio, upon their oath do find and present that Michael McKee, late of said county, on or about December 30th, 2025, within the county of Franklin aforesaid in violation of 2903.01A of the Ohio Revised Code did purposefully and with prior calculation and design cause the death of Monique Tepe. And there are also specifications added to this charge. The first is a 3-year firearm specification. The court docs read, the grand jurors further find and specify that Michael McKee had a firearm on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense and used it to facilitate the offense. The second specification is a 6-year firearm specification. The grand jurors further find and specify that Michael McKee had a firearm that was equipped with a firearm muffler or suppressor on or about his person or under his control while committing the offense. And all of that was just for Monique's murder. The next charge relates to Spencer's murder and says pretty similar things. The third charge comes from an allegation of aggravated burglary. The charging docs read in part, quote, Michael McKee did, by force, stealth, or deception, trespass in an occupied structure or in a separately secured or separately occupied portion of an occupied structure when Spencer Tepe and or Monique Tepe, a person other than the accomplice, was present with purpose to commit in the structure or in the separately secured or separately occupied portion of the structure any criminal offense. And the offender inflicted physical harm on Spencer Tepe and or Monique Tepe, and or the offender had a deadly weapon, to wit, a firearm on or about his person or under his control. Now, this count has the same 2 firearm specifications. Counts 4 and 5 are 2 more counts of aggravated murder with the same firearm specification. So to recap, that's 4 total counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. And with these new charges, all this means if he's convicted, Michael McKee could face the minimum of life in prison with a possibility of parole in 32 years. The maximum sentence he could face is the death penalty. Now, all of this is really heavy to think about, from the allegations to the background of Monique's relationship with Michael McKee to what's ahead. I know I have a lot of questions about it, so let's bring on today's guest to talk it all out. It's criminal defense attorney and friend of the show, Julie Rendelman. Julie, as always, it's great to see you and have you on Scandal with us today. And my first question for you is this. Michael McKee was already charged with murder, 2 counts for Spencer and Monique, but then he was indicted by a grand jury. I mean, why did we even need the grand jury?
Well, anytime an individual is arrested, at least in most states, it requires a grand jury presentation. That means there's a group of individuals that are basically sworn to secrecy that hear the evidence in this case to determine, is there enough evidence to go to trial? This does not equal a regular trial where we think about an individual being proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There just has to be enough evidence to show this jury there's enough to go to trial.
And it seems like that's what this grand jury thought because he now has been indicted. And that leads into my next question. So he was charged now, or indicted rather, with 4 counts of aggravated homicide. And I'm wondering about that because there are 2 victims in this case rather than 4. So why would there be 4 counts?
It's pretty common in most jurisdictions when we're talking about homicide, and by the way, in many other cases, whether it be grand larceny, robbery, that they charge numerous theories of the crime. So occasionally you'll see, which we've seen in other cases, where there'll be an intentional murder, there'll be a depraved indifference murder. And so it's not uncommon for 2 individuals to die, but there to be multiple counts of murder for the indictment.
It sounds to me like maybe prosecutors are trying to cover their bases. Like if we put forward more charges, then there's a likelihood that the defendant would be convicted on at least one of them. Is that the idea?
Actually, that's an excellent point. It sometimes backfires with prosecutors because you want to make sure when you're presenting it to the jury that you have one theory, because you certainly don't want a jury considering multiple theories and having that be the issue that an appellate court can hang their hat on. But absolutely, I think they want an open field right now to eventually determine which theory they think is going to be the strongest.
What about the firearm specifications that were added on for almost all of the charges? I believe all of them. And I know I sent you over the indictment. There were a couple. One that was included the idea that Michael McKee allegedly added a silencer onto the weapon. I guess that this would likely be used so that people, neighbors, whoever, wouldn't hear the gunshots and report it so that they could probably get away. Why would all of these specifications be added?
The specifications regarding the firearm are added because it can potentially result in higher charges and a longer sentencing. And keep in mind in this case, Sierra, when we read about this case, there's so little information that's come out. But the one thing we do know is that there was 2 young children in the house. And one of the questions is, why didn't they immediately get up when they heard the shots? And one of the reasons may very well be that he had a silencer. And so the children did not hear anything while they slept.
That's a really good point, Julie, bringing up the kids, because I have to think about this. I've reported on this case multiple times, and I always go back to the kids, the fact that there's a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old who the defendant allegedly passes by as they're sleeping and goes straight for the parents. But these 2 young children were in the home. Why were they bypassed, number one? And then number 2, is their testimony, I assume not from the 1-year-old, but from the 4-year-old. Is that something that prosecutors can even use because they're so young? How does that work?
So the first question, I think we're all guessing as to why it would be that an individual would focus on the 2 adult victims. And one of the answers could be that they're really just focused on the adult victims and aren't the type of person that would injure a child. I can't believe I'm actually saying that, but that is one of the possibilities. In terms of the plausibility of a 4-year-old being able to testify, is it possible? Yeah, it's very difficult for a 4-year-old to be swearable. Remember, a child has to be able, if they're going to testify under oath, they must be able to really understand the difference between right and wrong. For example, if I am 4 years old and I tell you your shirt is blue, that's a lie, and a 4-year-old needs to be able to delineate that, and they can't necessarily do that. Does that mean it prevents a child that's not swearable from testifying? No, but you have to kind of view it with some level of suspect because they're easily swayed because of their age.
And I guess I'm really looking into the future here, the idea of this child on the stand, because as we know, sometimes things move a little bit slowly in the justice system. That's way down the line if and when this does go to trial. And as I say that in the same breath, I'm going to ask another question that is way down the line. But it's that Ohio is a death penalty state. So there's like a handful of states that have this as a possibility. And whenever I have a case in one of those states, immediately that's what goes off in my head. And it has to be some of the most heinous of crimes. And in my opinion, the fact that we have a loving couple who went to sleep in their own house, that their children, young children, by the way, were just steps away, that they were executed in a place that should be safe, that is pretty heinous. How do prosecutors even go about deciding whether they're going to pursue the death penalty?
Again, Sierra, it's a great question with not always a great answer. Every jurisdiction is different. Every district attorney's prosecutor's office has different decision-making techniques. Some have a board that they get together to make a determination as to whether or not something is death penalty eligible. We know from looking in the past that there are some cases that are pushed because of politics. Cases you don't necessarily expect to be the death penalty that are the death penalty. Every single case and every single jurisdiction views it differently and approaches it differently.
Okay, let's move on to talk about another kind of obscure issue that we have here, motive. First of all, we know, and I'm sure our viewers know this, that prosecutors don't require a motive in order to bring charges or to yield a conviction, nothing like that. However, I personally, where I'm seated, I like to have a motive so I can kind of understand what was going on. And I think a lot of jurors probably feel like that too. This is something that investigators have been really tight-lipped about. I mean, the police chief in Columbus has straight up said, we can't discuss the motive. So, I mean, is it something that prosecutors are going to want to pursue, that maybe they do have kind of a motive in mind? We all kind of may have a motive in relation to this case, but is that something prosecutors would probably highlight?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah, you were correct in saying that you want to hear a motive, and jurors want to hear a motive. It's not required, but often one of the jury instructions are that if you believe there is a motive and it's been made out, you can use that in being able to articulate when evaluating the evidence whether or not the district attorney has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, it's a little odd because the two have not, the defendant has not been married to the victim for, I think it was over 8 years. And so one has to believe that assuming that the motive is jealousy or rage or not wanting her to be or have a happy life with someone else, that you'd have to expect that buildup existed for all of those 8 years. That's something the defense can potentially focus in on when they're trying to defend their client. Again, they're tight-lipped because either they don't fully know, they're still investigating, or they know, but they want to make sure information doesn't come out that potentially impacts their ability to get other evidence.
So with all of that being said, we don't have a definitive motive for all the reasons that you said, or maybe one or both or whatever it may be. So we're just kind of speculating on what it could be. And I think you hit on something really important that a lot of our viewers, myself included, I've talked about this with my husband, with my friends, with my coworkers, and we're all thinking exactly what you just said. 8 years since their divorce was finalized and he's harboring this resentment for that long. I mean, that is very wild. So is it possible one of the motives that they could go with is the fact that he just simply couldn't get over her? I mean, no matter how much time has passed, he couldn't stop thinking about her and had this resentment and anger. Is that possible?
Look, I mean, when we tried cases, that part of the evidence was that the guy didn't like the way the victim looked at him. So, I mean, motive can come from the most ridiculous of things. And I think this will be one of those cases where we're going to be hearing from witnesses that potentially know or have information in regards to whether or not this defendant, I know that there were comments made that the defendant would ask, for example, about the victim to people that were friendly with both of them. Now, by the way, Sarah, that's not unusual. I mean, you break up with someone, it's not unusual to go, how are they doing? Are they doing well? It's different if you are texting them every day and you're not with them, or if you're driving by their house, and stalking them. I'm not saying that's definitively what we have here, but I think the prosecution and the defense is going to have to separate what is stalking and what is just the normal course of questions asked or interest about someone that you used to love.
I think it's interesting that you brought up all this witness stuff, because that's kind of a huge part of our episode today, talking about friends of Monique, the quotes that they said. And to your point, yes, if I ran into somebody who was friends with my ex-boyfriend, I'd be like, what's up with that guy? He's doing okay? You just kind of like ask, and then that's pretty much where it ends. But one of the allegations that Monique's friend said was that Michael McKee allegedly, again, this is speculation, but allegedly just couldn't get over Monique, couldn't get past it, and thought, she will never be able to live without me. And then here she goes and marries a dentist who's very successful, that they have children and that they have a life. And I mean, if we're being real, whenever we break up with someone, we always want to be on the winning team. We always want to be doing better than our ex.
They should never be happy without us. Yes, I understand that. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or
but
as happy.
Exactly. Like and we say this kind of like in a jest, joking type of way, but I wonder if, based on the allegations of Monique's friends, are that he really took this to heart, especially if we're looking at the timeline of 8 years here. And I guess another point that I have too is the fact that the defendant here is a surgeon, a doctor. She, was married to him and then goes on and marries a dentist. I'm wondering if maybe something in his mind, if you're a prosecutor, you could say, oh, she replaced me with someone better who's more successful, who maybe doesn't have a malpractice suit pending. I mean, is that something that we can consider?
Yes, again, we can't lose sight of the 8 years and what's been happening in those 8 years that would motivate someone to remember, regardless of the lawsuits, regardless of what he was going through, which we're aware of in terms of his own personal life, there is a part that's hard pressed to imagine a vascular surgeon who was pretty successful in terms of his business, making the decision to go after his ex-wife from 8 years ago and decide a day or two before the New Year's that he's going to end her life and her husband's life. But that's where we go to kind of the information we don't know, because there might be, we might find at the end of the day, which we have in the past, that the evidence is there, but it's not as strong as we thought. Sometimes we're waiting for the shoe to drop, and it never really drops. And then there's cases where we find out additional information. We're like, well, of course he did it. And here we have all the bases of the motive, the way he did it, videos, forensics, and the like.
I think you brought up a really good point here. The main question, why now? If it was in fact Michael McKee and they'd been separated, really they were separated since 2016, divorced in 2017. What triggered him now? Has he been mad this whole time? Again, these are allegations and speculation, but was he mad the whole time, or did he all of a sudden see a photo of her pop up on Instagram? Or like, what was the thing that, pushed it to the next level? And then you also mentioned stalking here, which is an allegation that has kind of been a rumor, really. We haven't heard that from police or investigators or anything like that. So is it possible, to your point, that we don't have anything like this? There isn't even a trigger. They weren't even friends on social media. Could it be that obscure, I guess?
It is certainly possible that the motive derives from all the things we're talking about, and yet he still harbored it for all these years. We've seen it in DV victims in the past who left their abuser years before only to find themselves killed at their hands years later. So it's certainly not out of the question. It's just without other pieces of evidence and with us kind of looking at it without seeing or establishing, for example, the gun in his house. Is that gun in fact linked to the house? Because if it's not, then all this is conjecture about a guy being obsessed with his ex. Is he the person that was seen outside of the home? Well, if it's not, it's just conjecture. Is his car the one that was driving by? If it is, it's not, you know what I mean? All these pieces are going to be pieces of a puzzle that maybe will point to him doing it, and maybe they won't.
It's hard because if we're using your puzzle metaphor, we have the pieces in front of us, but we're missing pieces, you and I. So we're trying to put them together, but there are pieces that the defense likely knows, the prosecution, investigators, whatever, that they're not telling us about. So
right.
To me, at face value, it's just they broke up. This guy allegedly went and killed her almost a decade later. That's crazy. Where did this come from? And it also gets me just stressed out and sad to think about. We always hear the statistic that DV survivors are most at danger when they're leaving. But she left years ago and moved on. Right. So then are any of us safe? And I guess all of this kind of goes back to the reason I wanted to talk to you, how we're going to end this all, is that you're a defense attorney, a skilled one. Let's say that he is your client. How do you defend this? And I guess keep in mind the fact that you would have a lot more information that you or I have right now. But sure. What are your ideas about that?
Well, first of all, remember, I think, and I unfairly, but I think both of us are talking about DV victims. There actually isn't evidence yet that establishes she, in fact, was a DV victim of his. It sounds like he was controlling. I'm not sure that anything we've heard so far rises to the level of being a domestic violence victim. I think that we may hear more. But there is some perspective on the part of the defense to be able to say, it's not like the relationship ended with violence. There was never violence, quote unquote, in the relationship. And there's no reason to believe that after 8 years, he would suddenly become violent with this individual. Don't forget also, Sierra, depending on how strong the evidence is, this could be a mental health disease or defect case. This could be a case where the evidence is so overwhelming that they say he was fine until about 7.5 years after they broke up, and he had a complete mental breakdown, didn't realize or recognize what he was doing was wrong, and ended up there. So we still don't know what road the defense could take in terms of defending the defendant.
And you're right to point out, Julie, we don't have a definitive statement here that there was domestic violence. In fact, police have said there were no police calls. There's no paperwork about this. We've just heard this from friends and maybe some family that it sounds like something was going on. So I think that's what both sides really have to look at to determine what actually happened within the relationship. And as you pointed out, Julie, it might have been before we started recording, there isn't that much info about this case. I mean, enough to fill an episode, multiple episodes, but still so many missing puzzle pieces. So thank you for coming on and walking us through what we do know today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Michael McKee is due back in court on Friday for an update about the status of his extradition back to Ohio. We're going to have a team there, so make sure to check back in with Scandal for any updates on this case. And in the meantime, if you have any ideas for a future Scandal episode, you can send them our way. Our tip line is scandal@lawandcrime.com. And if you want to connect with me personally on social media, you can find me on places like Instagram. My tag is @Sierra Gillespie. Thanks for watching today's episode of Scandal. As always, I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.